I'll forgive you for the making me learn all your trying to learn your songs back in the day.
It wasn't as hard as, let's say, Passion and Warfare. See, that was worse, right?
Today on Eon Music, I am joined by the extremist who went surfing with the alien and came back to Shalabal and now just wants to play his guitar. I'm talking, of course, about Joe Satriani. Joe, how are you doing today?
Very good. I love that introduction.
I'm actually loving looking in your background. I can see all the guitar straps.
Ah, yes, yeah. It's really empty because, we're leaving for the tour in a couple of days, so all my guitars are gone. Usually the racks are filled with guitars and there's amps everywhere, but everything is, on is being shipped overseas. So yeah, it's kind of empty, but the straps are here, the leftovers, the prototypes, and you know.
It's been a year since you've been on tour as a solo artist, and now you're in a band with like your oldest buddy.
Yeah.
Um, First off, how is it going to differ from a G3 concert?
Well, the G3 concerts are pretty straightforward. We have three acts. Each act gets to take the stage for a little less than an hour to do whatever they want to do. And then we get together for a three-song jam. So that's what I set up way back in late 95, and we started in 96. And we kind of stuck with that because it works. This is a bit different now because we have an actual band that Steve and I take the stage right from the beginning of the show together. So we're in a band together, and there's only a few times during the show where one of us will walk off stage for a song or two and then come back in. And so that's how we decided to do it. We wanted to get out on tour to sort of celebrate finally doing this like this. We were only halfway through making our SatchVai album. So we can't, it's not like we can play all the new songs.
Mhm.
So we thought, well, how are we going to do this? So we figured, well, we can play some of the new songs that we've worked out, and then we can give the fans what they really love to hear, like they want to see Steve play For the Love of God, or they want to see him play the Hydra. And then how do we make those things special? And we bring each other out to add to these songs that they've heard us play as solo artists before, but now it's a bit of a collaboration, and that's been really great. We had one really good week of rehearsals a few months ago, and it really worked. We were wondering how it was going to really work, but it really clicked. Everybody felt like it was a celebration, and so the real fun is when we get in front of an audience. I mean, that's really when the magic starts to happen.
Obviously, for guitar fans, the very exciting thing is what you've just said. Yourself and Steve are going to play each other's songs. Now, I'm not going
Yeah.
to ask too much about the set list right now, but of
It's right over there.
it reminded me of what's now a kind of it's almost a legendary music and moment in music when Steve very first performed the song Liberty at the Guitar Legends.
Yeah, yeah.
And Brian May was on stage, Cozy Powell, and you were playing rhythm guitar on it, which seems insane. I mean, that's the only instance I could find. Am I that where you have performed live with Steve on one of his songs or vice versa?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's the only time we did that. That was a very interesting experience for Steve and I because we had never done anything like that. And Brian was the musical director,
Mhm.
and we spent what, about 4 days, 3 or 4 days in London rehearsing while the Guitar Legends Festival was going on in Seville, and we got there the day before, so we missed, like the festival basically until our night came.
Mhm.
And yeah, we everyone was wondering like, how's this going to work? A tag team kind of approach to a festival, but it turned out it was a lot of fun, and it did give us the chance, to collaborate in really bizarre ways that we would never have dreamed of. Like,
Mhm.
me just standing there and looking at Steve and Brian, play Liberty. That was pretty fantastic. And we did a lot of things. I mean, by the end of that show, I'm standing next to Joe Walsh and Nuno and Steve and Brian. It was, it's pretty crazy. Cozy Powell, great Cozy Powell on drums, Rick Wakeman on keyboards. I mean, it was pretty insane
Hmm.
group of people. It was a lot of fun. But yes, that was the first time I think we ever did at least one of Steve's originals like that.
Back then, like 1990, 91, you had Passion and Warfare, Flying in a Blue Dream. I was buying guitar for the practice musician, Guitar World. Would you say that was a real peak for the genre then?
Certainly, the record making was given a lot more leeway in a way. And it's a funny thing about the industry is that when you're super successful and under the microscope, very often you're caged, and you feel that because there's this pressure to continue the success. And so the focus becomes more narrow. Uh, what Steve and I were experiencing was so unheard of in a way, and we still didn't sort of decide that we were going to try to get more commercial, I guess. So we were still pushing the boundaries. So those albums were still crazy. I think from Not of This Earth, Surfing, Flying, and Blue Dream to the Extremist, all the way to the eponymous release in '95, they were all so different. Like a pop artist would never do that, change direction so radically, change production style of album making. And I think Steve from Flexible onward, he did the same thing. He just keep changing, and Steve's completely nuts, and he can play anything, and that he puts his imagination to. So, uh, in a way, it was a sort of an interesting peak because not only was, let's say, just focusing on Steve, not only was technically he breaking boundaries
Yeah.
with his technique, but he was also changing the way that instrumental rock records were being produced. They weren't fusion oriented. They weren't like rock guys trying to get more jazzy, and which was really what happened in the late '60s and the '70s, which is it was a progression for rock artists to become more complicated,
Hmm.
let's say. And it got more jammy. But you have to understand, like, if we're just talking about Steve, here's a kid who loved Kiss. So he was going to make a solid rock record, no matter how difficult or complicated it was.
Hmm.
And that was what I found that was so much fun, was that the production sensibilities were at the top of what a rock artist would look to do.
Hmm.
And but there was this other thing that he was doing, seven strings, just the pure brilliance of technique and doing things that couldn't be done before. And that did, in a way, as you said, represent a high point. As time goes on, the industry changed a lot. The internet really helped artists find their fans, but at the same time, it made them rein it in and become more specific,
Hmm.
so that EDM is just EDM and blues is just blues, and instrumental guitar is just technique. You know what I mean? To service these communities that now are identifiable, you can go, the artist can go directly to them.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, I know it's hard to believe, but back in 1990, it was, you know, it was like fly fishing. You know what I mean? I mean, you'd throw your record out there and you'd be like, you have no idea what's happening out there in the world. Are fans liking it? I mean, they were just magazines and radio stations. Most of them ignored us, So that was a gift. I'm going to say it that way. Let's put it simply. To be ignored sometimes is a great artistic gift because you don't feel any pressure to conform.
Yeah, yeah.
So there was less conformity. Now, I think guitar playing is more outrageous, better than it's ever been before, but there's a lot of conformity.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's because it's the only way that the musicians can survive. It's just the reality of today.
You talked about the changes in your career from, as you say, Not of This Earth up to The Extremist.
Yeah.
I, for one, am a big fan of the only vocal songs you ever did
Thank you.
on Flying in a Blue Dream. Was that kind of record companies going, we want you to sing, we need you to sell more records?
No, the thing to remember is that I was never an instrumentalist, and I was always a guitar player in a band that was a vocal oriented
Mhm.
band, whether it was a rock band or a funk band or something like that. And right before I put out my first album, I was in a three-piece power pop band, kind of like Green Day or something like that.
Hmm.
It was just a little bit more Van Halen meets Green Day kind of thing. We weren't very good, but we were very excited about the whole thing. So I spent like 4 or 5 years singing all the time. And and then as a side project, as a personal development project, I create my own publishing company, record company, and I put out this ridiculous EP with just guitar, no bass,
Hmm.
drums, keyboards, anything like that. And then I decide I'm going to do a full length album. That became Not of This Earth. So, but meanwhile, I'm still working in these bands that have singers. And so when I eventually signed up with Relativity Records, they're saying, well, they're trying to figure out what do you do? And I said, well, I've been in this band, power pop kind of band, and I sing, and not too well, but I can keep a tune going, And so in my association with Relativity and Bill Graham Management, it was like, now's the time to spread your wings, do whatever you want. And
Yeah.
I was given sort of carte blanche, not only by the record company, but also by Bill and the Bill Graham Management team to spread my wings and just do whatever I want. And
Hmm.
again, there was very little focus on me, which, as I said earlier, was a gift.
Hmm.
Of course, when it's happening, you're really upset because no one's talking about you or listening to your music. It's only years later that you go back and you go, wow, what a gift that was, that no one paid attention to me and I could do whatever I want. So that's what I did. And, my co-producer John Cuniberti had been with me since 1980. He was
Wow.
not only our front of house mixer for the band The Squares, but he was also the producer for all of the demos that we made at Hyde Street Studios in San Francisco and Tewksbury and Berkeley. So he knew me as a singer guitar player as well. And so we'd go to the studio, when we were doing Surfing with the Alien, he's like, Joe, when are you going to sing? And I'm going, not yet, not yet, So by the time we had a successful album. I'd been on tour with Mick Jagger. There were a lot of things that had happened that made me feel a little bit more comfortable to share more of who I was
Hmm.
with the audience. And the label really wanted me to, as I said before, experiment. We could make the longest album we wanted. I mean, Flying in Blue Dream was a long record,
Yeah, it's
and
like eight.
CDs were coming out, and
Yeah, it's like
so
18 songs, isn't it?
yes, yeah. So we didn't know which ones were going to make it, but we recorded everything.
Hmm.
And then when we sat back and we listened to it, we thought, wow, it works better if they're all included in the project rather than just having one vocal song, like if we tried to squeeze the album down to 10, it just didn't make any sense. And I was really keen on putting out albums that I could live with for the rest of my career. Like I imagined you know, I'd be like in my 60s still going on tour. And I thought, what would I play? I wouldn't want to be stuck playing just one kind of song.
Hmm.
And so I said that to myself, the only way to do that is to take the risk and show people everything that you can do.
Hmm.
You can play the blues, you can play funk, you can sing funny songs, you can sing serious songs, you can play slow, you can play fast, clean, distorted, you know what I mean? Just give everybody everything. And then hopefully that will give you this longevity,
Yeah.
because people, when you start to show up and do these things, they're like, oh, yeah, that's what he does. He did that way back when. And that's normal for Joe to do that. Um, so that worked out. I mean, it wasn't any, genius or anything. It's just I took a chance artistically.
Was The Extremist, in a way, a reaction to that? Because that was an epic major label, and I think there's 10 songs on it, all instrumental, and it's probably one of your most polished albums too.
Yeah, well, that's a result of two failures and one success. So the album, I started it at Bearsville Studios in Woodstock, New York, with the rhythm section from the Mick Jagger band.
Mhm.
And we got some really good stuff like Rubina's Blue Sky Happiness and New Blues. But the rest, the straight ahead rock stuff didn't really work. For one reason or another, it just didn't click.
Mhm.
So I broke that down relocated back to San Francisco, and John Cuniberti and I decided, let's just go back to the earlier, flying surfing approach. And we did Summer Song, and we started to build those other tracks like Why that were a little bit more automated. They had some drum machine element in there. And then after a couple of months, I said, this is not working out. I don't want to go backwards. You know what I mean? So I stopped and I took maybe 9 months off. And then my manager at the time, Mick Brigden from the Bill Graham group, told me that he said, why don't we find a different producer and a different place to finish the album? And I thought, okay, but like, who's going to want to take on an instrumental guitar player? I mean, it was the height of, grunge was coming out and everything, and that was the last thing on people's minds that was more instrumental guitar. But when he said Andy Johns, I thought, well, of course I want to work with Andy Johns, but why would he want to work with me, But I went down to LA and I met with Dave Jordan and Mike Klink. And then I met Andy at Ed Van Halen's studio at 5150. And we just really clicked. I played him all the demos that I had. And he was very encouraged. He really thought we could do something different. And, I said, look, I just don't want it to sound like Not of the Surfing or Flying. It's got to sound some totally different. And I can do all this stuff, but how do we get it on the album, And so the key was, put a band together, rehearse the band, go into a big studio, which is very traditional.
Hmm.
And that's why that album turned out the way it did. And he wound up using a lot of the tracks, like most of the guitar work, all the melodies, solos, for the song Summer Song were done by John and I, 9 months earlier. And we just worked around it. So there were, Rubina's Blue Sky Happiness, Why, New Blues. We used those tracks that went all the way back to the Bearsville sessions. We just recorded some new ones and then added to the previous tracks. But Andy's brilliance in the studio and the way that he would pull things out of me, I never would have been able to record a track like Friends if it hadn't been me just standing right next to Andy and saying, asking him, is that Celtic? I'm from Long Island. I don't know Celtic. And I kept saying, I want it to sound Celtic. So there are things that producers can do that really
Yeah, yeah.
bring stuff out of you that, you can't quite get out of yourself.
I want to ask you, given you're going out with Steve, what was it like when you first heard Passion and Warfare? What did you think of that album?
Oh yeah. I was like, yes. I was cheering. As soon as I saw, first of all, the cover, I thought, oh, this is going to be amazing. And you have to remember, I knew Steve when he was 12 years old, and we just came from this little town on Long Island and went to the same public high school. And so any time there was a step forward in his career, I was the guy cheering the loudest in the crowd. You know what I mean? And but I see that every time I see him put out a new project, I see him write it, I hear him write a new song or something. I think back to how we spent so many hours together as young kids playing, and how amazing it is that I got to witness that this young person turned into this amazing artist as an adult, and he continues to develop. I don't know how to really put that into words, but that it was that same feeling. I was listening to Passion and Warfare the first time, and I'm going, "This is amazing. This is." I remember this element of his playing and that element, and when the light, seeing the light bulb go off in his head when we were talking about this kind of scale or that kind of harmony, and I started to hear it, come to fruition on that album. So, and the first thing I thought was, well, you've got to put a band together and go out on tour. But that didn't happen because he was too popular. That's why White Snake, David Lee Roth, you know what I mean? It was he took advantage of some great job offers that again allowed him to show the world the depth of his musicianship. He wasn't just a technician.